I find it hard to read this without reacting very strongly. I suggest removing this completely, or rewording this significantly. Being privileged, men are not left behind, like ever. If you want a productive debate on this document, I suggest removing rhetoric of this sort. Did you read my link? There are many ways in which men are left behind, and education is an example where women get more degrees at every level. Your source isn't relevant to my reaction. Do you understand why "we shouldn't leave men behind" is highly triggering? Last July, James Damore, who worked for Google at the time, wrote a 10-page memo critical of Google's internal, far left-wing bias. The part that got all the attention centered on Damore, daring to postulate that maybe it wasn't sexism that caused less women to seek out jobs coding. Damore instead chalked it up to innate biological differences that exist on average. And I'm sure you can imagine the SJW reaction. Of course, they ignored that he was actually providing alternatives to make coding jobs more attractive to women. But that doesn't matter. He dared to speak out against the factually incorrect idea that men and women could be different. And in response, Google fired him. The reason they gave? Perpetuating gender stereotypes. So Damore vowed to sue them. And we've now just gotten our first taste of that. A class action lawsuit against Google has been filed by Damore and several others, and the complaint is rather revealing. But first, here are some of the charges they are claiming against Google. Google discriminates against and/or threatened to fire employees based on their political affiliation. Google discriminated against employees based on their race and gender. Google harassed employees based on their race and gender. Google reprimanded employees for resisting these violations of the law. And there were a few others. Now you may be thinking,
well, sure, they fired Damore for perpetuating gender stereotypes, which sounds completely bogus. But how can they prove these claims?
Well, Google has made the very bizarre decision to have a series of internal message boards and group chats for their employees. Internal message boards that are directly linked to each employee's internal Google account. Meaning, any individual employee, say a manager who can hire and fire people, can very easily scroll through any other employee's post history. Now you may be thinking,
well, Sitch, that doesn't seem very strange to me. Of course a giant company like Google is going to have an internal message board for employees to communicate with each other about work and technical issues and helping each other code and stuff.
Yeah, except you see, where it gets weird is that there were tons of message boards and group chats that had nothing to do with work, but covered every possible topic you can think of, from movies to sports, to being in a polyamorous relationship, to being a furry. Now you may be thinking, yeah, that's pretty weird. I go to my job to, work, not ask my fellow employees advice for discussing my polyamorous relationship.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
But we'll get into that later, because you know, of course, that with the plethora of groups, there were political ones. And what do you think they talked about in these groups? I'll give you a hint. Thinking about the trend of trying to explain away anti-fascist violence as random. It's anything but random. It's very precisely targeted. There's literally only one reason an anti-fascist would be violent towards you. You're a fascist. I mean, human beings are human beings, and we're complex, and we never only have one reason for doing anything. But still, people don't commit anti-fascist violence except in response to fascist violence. Anti-fascists are not roaming, looking for punching targets. Anti-fascists are showing up where proud fascists are making public displays of force, and making their own public displays of force. If you don't want to get punched by an anti-fascist, it's simple. Don't go to white supremacist rallies, and don't own white power symbols. It's not oppression if you can't be out and proud about your belief that white people are just better, without risk of being punched. Getting punched for participating in a white supremacist rally is not oppression, it's reasonable social consequences. Well, guess it might be time for a revolution. How do people cope with this? I've never been part of a military or war effort before. I guess I can be useful as IT support or for hacking. But my emotions keep swinging between despair and anger. I don't know how useful I'll be. Get in touch with your friendly local Antifa. Don't try to do this alone. There are people who have been fighting neo-Nazis for decades. They're nice people, generally. Get to know them. I won't say violence has no place, but if you're going to do anything risky, I can't overemphasize the importance of networking with people who have been thinking about scenarios like the one we're in for years, and building relationships with them. We are only powerful if we organize. Now, while some of these groups were in fact anonymous, it doesn't seem like it was because they were afraid of being fired. It is a given that there are people working at Google who have an interest in undermining racial resistance. Statistically, that's guaranteed. Assume that people you can't trust are reading what you write at all times, and that some of them might try to get involved in something violent in order to undermine your movement, rather than further an objective. Use encryption and be aware of who your audience is. I'll just leave it at that. So it seems they were far more afraid of Nazis than they were of being fired for any regressive position they may hold. Now you may be saying,
Now sure, there's a lot more posts about supporting Antifa and punching Nazis, and this all seems very workplace appropriate, but it doesn't really seem like it's gonna help Damore's case that much. I mean, it's not like there are other employees demanding that Damore and others should be fired based on their beliefs, or their gender, or their race. That would just be very unprofessional.
this is not the time for not all whatever. The choice to be a Republican is the choice to align yourself with a white supremacist, xenophobic regime. That wasn't true in 2015, but it's true now. Like, it's not popular to say, but one of two major American political parties has adopted white supremacy as a political platform. I once again find myself severely disappointed with management's apparent inability, or worse, lack of desire to provide a non-toxic environment. Seriously, if I want to work somewhere where white nationalists, racists, climate deniers, and misogynists were supported as viewpoints worthy of protection, I'd find a job at Fox News or in the Trump administration. Some Googlers voted for Secretary Clinton. Others voted for Donald Trump for legitimate personal reasons. Please respect each other's rights to choose, be tolerant, try to understand each other, and put your faith in the rule of law. I mean no disrespect, but statements like this come off rather condescending. In my opinion, when rule of law has been killing black folks for generations and is now well documented, and part of the platform of the man who was elected was that law would be harder on black folk, this sort of statement smells strongly of privilege that many people in the US do not have. But I'm just going to remind everyone that some of the people who work at Google voted for him and support him. Unfortunately, as we've seen over the past 2 weeks, this puts them at odds with basic human decency. If that's their political position, they have to live with it. If they don't like people calling a fascist what he is, that's their problem. Now, I'd like to point out at this stage of the video that I did not vote for Donald Trump. I don't like Donald Trump at all, but I do believe in a democracy and people's right to vote for who they want to without being threatened. I know, that's just some crazy idea, right? Anyways, one good thing that could come out of the trash fire that is the Damore memo is that several of the people who agree with the document have actively stated their support. Pretty much all of those Googlers are employed at will. If Google management cares about diversity and inclusion, they should, and I urge them to send a clear message by not only terminating Mr. Damore, but also severely disciplining or terminating those who have expressed support. I would talk to legal before assembling a list of people who are possibly creating a hostile workplace, and I know that if I ever sue Google for harassment, I should demand to see all managers' shit list to see if this was something management already knew and thus let happen. Oh, that's right, did I forget to mention people were making blacklists inside of the company? Because they were? I'll be blunt, I meant there are a select few that I'm fairly certain should be fired, and we would be a better company for it. This isn't just a political disagreement. Their judgment about what is going to hurt coworkers is incredibly awful, and they are willingly blind to what they are doing, with their serial shitposting to wide audience lists. The only problem is that these things are very hard to prove, and these disputes, unfortunately, end up hurting the victim's career as well. Google isn't the government. Proof of wrongdoing is not needed to fire anyone. In the US at least. Oh, how terrible. Given that, I sometimes wonder if the optimal strategy is to fire all those accused 100% of the time. Many Googlers have claimed that is harassment or some other rule violation to critique articles that push the social justice political agenda. A few Googlers have openly called for others to be fired over it. Do you support this viewpoint? And if so, can we add a clear statement of banned opinions to the employee handbook so that everyone knows what the ground rules are? Short answer, speaking for myself, yes. The posting of this kind of critique, and in fact, the posting of this very question itself, directly contributes to the creation of a hostile work environment for women at this company. You can post to the Breitbart comment section at home on your own time, and if you feel like being asked to kindly not behave this way is censoring, or that your rights are somehow being violated, perhaps everyone involved might be happier if you found some place to work where the culture is more in line with your values. You've created a great honeypot. Log the usernames, forward to HR, let the firings continue until behavior improves. And yet we have a bunch of white males crying bloody murder over the suggestion that we slightly lower the hiring bar for women and minorities. No one is saying we'll raise the bar for them. It's not a zero-sum game. Next time you get invited to speak at a conference, especially if you're a white male, ask the organizer to confirm you're the only white male on the panel in the speaker lineup. If not, say you are honored but must decline, and give the reason. And because you are at Google, guess what? They're gonna change the panel for you. You'll feel bad about inconveniencing them, but not that bad. When the cheesy white male executive is in the green room and glaring at you because he was bounced from the panel in favor of a woman on his team, you'll feel pretty damn smug. If we really care about diversity in tech, we don't just need to chase serial offenders out of Google, we need to discourage them all throughout the industry. We should be willing to give a wink and a nod to other Silicon Valley employers over terminable offenses. Dear all the boys, do not put the burden of relieving your systemic misogynist discrimination on women. Dear all the white people, do not put the burden of relieving your systemic racist discrimination on the people that aren't white. The author was not alone in his views. 175 plus people agreed to some degree before the poll was taken down and leaked. They, and others like them, work among us and may be managers, on hiring and promotion committees, etc. What is being done to understand the true scope of this cancer within our culture? I think it's critically important that we discuss the steps women and minorities at Google should take when faced with colleagues who openly support the views in the document. This is a functional workplace, and many are already dealing with the question and the anxiety that comes with it. Now you may be saying,
"Yeah, Sitch, that all looks pretty bad, but that's just fellow co-workers creating a hostile work environment. There weren't any managers saying this kind of stuff, right?"
During the event, Porat, the chief financial officer of Google, and Naughton, the human resource director of Google, also discussed that when looking at groups of people for promotions or for leadership opportunities on new projects, Google would be taking into account gender and ethnic demographics. They then mentioned that Google's racial and gender preferences in hiring were not up for debate. The summit covered general topics such as how Google could increase its diversity. Specifically, the Google presenters went through some of their policies that were designed to accomplish this, such as treating preferred categories of people, women, certain but not all ethnic minorities, differently during the hiring process by providing extra interviews and putting applicants into a more welcoming environment based on their race or gender. The Google presenters also discussed putting diverse individuals into higher priority queues so that they would be more likely to be hired and hired faster. Google defined diverse individuals as women or individuals who are not Caucasian or Asian. I like that somehow women are automatically diverse, but not Asians. Because, you know, they're practically white as it is.
I think the Asians should have their own city, and it should be walled off with fences. And we should give them Vancouver, and we should change the name of the city to Asialopolis.
On August 3rd, 2017, George Sadlier, a director at Google, sent out a mass email condemning James's essay as repulsive and intellectually dishonest, and promising an HR investigation into Damore. Sadlier also promoted posts that advocated for physical violence against Damore. Damore received a late-night email from Alex Heidelo, a site-reputable engineer at Google in Sadler's organization, which stated, "You're a misogynist and a terrible person. I will keep hounding you until one of us is fired. Fuck you." So, what do you think happened when Damore told HR about this email? They told him, "You should just stay home. You can work from home, right?" You, the person who was threatened, not, the person making the threats. Not only did Google terminate Damore for his political views relating to workplace issues, but they then rewarded individuals who disagreed with and disparaged Damore. The Google recognition team allows employees to give fellow employees peer bonuses for arguing against Damore's political viewpoints. Peer bonuses were typically reserved for outstanding work performance or for going above and beyond an employee's job duties. Defending the liberal agenda or defending violations of California employment law is not any Google employee's job description. In one example of this, an employee gave a peer bonus to another employee and stated that the bonus was for speaking up for Googly values and promoting diversity and inclusion in the wretched hive of scum and villainy that is Damore's memo. The Google recognition team reviewed this justification, considered it appropriate, and allowed the bonus to proceed. I have yet to see effective increasing diversity efforts which do not bring unfairness against white men. Frankly, I could care less about being unfair to cisgender, straight, able-bodied, wealthy white men. You already have all the advantages in the world. We will not agree on that. The fact that the first comment on this post is a microaggression speaks volumes about the cultural problem at Google. I understand that we are not going to agree, and you are entitled to your own opinions. However, I wish you'd considered how I might receive the remarks before you made them. I am really sorry for all who got offended by this guy's comments. It was flagged to me by this guy's manager and HR. It is not acceptable behavior, and I do treat this seriously. I don't want to extend my comment here before it gets resolved on official channels. Thanks for understanding. In a follow-up conversation, Fong Jones doubled down on her position in the context of a discussion about whether we should engage in work to support people who are not white and or not men in technology. I think my comment is absolutely reasonable. I feel that if there is any harm to the interests of white men from that work, it is more than made up for by the benefits to everyone as a whole. When Fong Jones was reported to Google HR, Google's initial reaction was to state that since Fong Jones was responding to some pretty insensitive comments from other colleagues and reacting to an environment that we know has been less than friendly to women and minorities at times, that her behavior was taken out of context and excused her comments. Google HR then stated that some empathy could be valuable as you reflect on the conversations. Colm Buckley, a high-ranking SRE director, stated his intention to stifle political dissent within Google. You know, there are certain alternative views, including different political views, which I do not want people to feel safe to share here. My tolerance ends at my friend's terror. You can believe that women or minorities are unqualified all you like. I can't stop you, but if you say it out loud, then you deserve what's coming to you. Yes, this is silencing. I intend to silence these views. They are violently offensive. Adam Fletcher, an L6 SRE manager at Google, Jake McGuire, an L7 SRE manager at Google, and Nori Heikkinen, a level 6 SRE manager at Google, all publicly endorsed blacklisting conservatives and actively preventing them from seeking employment opportunities at Google. Fletcher stated in reference to conservatives, who he categorized as hostile voices, "I'll never ever hire, transfer you onto my team. Ever. I don't care if you are a perfect fit, or technically excellent, or whatever. I will actively not work with you, even to the point where your team or product is impacted by this decision. I'll communicate why to your manager if it comes up." You're being blacklisted by people at companies outside of Google. You might not have been aware of this, but people know. People talk. There are always social consequences. Kim Burchett, an L7 SWE manager, proposed creating an online company blacklist of political conservatives inside Google. I'm considering creating a public inside Google document of people who make diversity difficult. I'm thinking of something like a Google Doc that accepts comments and which calls out those Googlers who repeatedly make public statements that are unsupportive of diversity, with links to those statements so that readers can decide for themselves. The list will be open to contributions from others, but I personally will be the judge of what is included and what is excluded. Here's another thing. You are here posting devil's advocate troll bullshit along the vague lines of, oh no, some hypothetical white man who is just barely above the hiring bar might be intangibly harmed by some Googlers who decided to give marginally more training or education to non-Googler women. This is why we say you are part of the problem. You are contributing to a culture that drives out women who are otherwise strong Google contributors, all for fake internet points. A Google employee complained to Google HR regarding a highly offensive post from an employee in the developer product group. The post stated, if you put a group of 40-something white men in a room together, tell them to come up with something creative or innovative, they'll come back and tell you how enjoyable the process was and how they want to do it again, but they'll come up with fuck all as a result. Google HR responded, given the context of the post and that the employee's main point is to highlight that it is helpful to have diverse perspectives, it doesn't appear that the post violates our policy. Perplexed, the Google employee responded to Google HR by replacing the term 40-something white men with women, and asked how that was not a breach of conduct. Google failed to respond. Kim Burchett, in the T5 to T6 promo committee I served on, 2 out of 4 committee members were women. Yay! 4 out of 4 committee members were white. Boo! 12 out of the 15 candidates were white men. Boo! This person is deciding promotions. Charles Mendis, an engineering director at Google, informed his team that he was freezing headcount so that he could reserve future open positions for diverse candidates. Often the first qualified candidate is not a diversity candidate. Waiting to have a few qualified candidates and being patient is important. Here's a suggestion from my wife. I think only women and people of color should be allowed to make hiring decisions at Google for a year, and or randomly assign a third of each position type to only be hired by women, people of color, or unselected type. I'm going to do my part to address this problem until recruiting comes up with a coherent strategy. From now on, I'm going to devote at least the first third of my 45-minute interview time to discussion of experience with diversity. I'd like to comment on a pattern I frequently see in internal discussions where things go off the rails because well-intentioned, usually, engineers always want to examine the facts or debate the exact goals. As engineers, we've trained to pay attention to the details, think logically, challenge assumptions that may be incorrect, and so on. These are all excellent tools for technical discussions. But they can be terrible tools for discussions around race, discrimination, justice, and so on, because these discussion topics touch with a high cultural and emotional content. That's because questioning the exact details can easily be perceived as questioning the overall validity of the effort or the veracity of a historical context. In these situations, determining the exact truth can often be counterproductive because it's situationally inappropriate. Debating a point may be fine in one context, but totally inappropriate in a different context. So what is this inappropriate question? The white majority of the US, 63% non-Hispanic white, is underrepresented in Google, 60% white employees overall. If we want to achieve racial mixing up to mimic the country, then we should also hire more whites. Is that one of the goals of diversity effort?
No, unacceptable. Oh no, somebody's going to get an email.
One of the great things about Google's internal communication mechanism is that as a manager, I can easily go find out if I really want to work with you. When we're chatting for 30 minutes because you want to join my team, you're going to be on your best behavior. I keep a written blacklist of people whom I will never allow on or near my team based on how they view and treat their coworkers. That blacklist got a little longer today. I am thrilled that you don't feel comfortable expressing these views at Google. I'm excited that you can't question the humanity and basic value of your coworkers without worrying about blowback. I'm happy that publicly undermining the people around you might carry some consequences. I'm happy that treating people with respect has become table stakes. I'm happy that Googlers have reacted like a body to an infection, surrounding and isolating, trying to contain the damage, to limit how many people your pseudo-scientific racism and sexism can hurt. I don't even remember him talking about race at all in the memo, but whatever. To the many inquiries I've received, yes, I've seen the echo chamber document. Yes, I personally deeply disagree with much of its contents and insinuations. Yes, it shows that bias is alive and well in the minds of at least a few we've hired. Yes, I remain resolute that bias and discrimination has no place on my team, just as they have no place at Google. And finally, yes, I will continue to work to ensure that bias at Google, whether stated badly or concealed, is rendered powerless through our practices, our systems, and the unflagging attention of the vast majority of our people. Please reach out to me if you've been subject to retaliatory reverse discrimination complaints to HR for speaking up against Damore, etc. I'm trying to put together an escalation, and if you were told you're gagged about it and are an individual contributor in the US, said gagging is not valid because of NLRB rules about protected concerted activity regarding working conditions. What do you think, guys? With all this information that managers publicly put out there, you think Damore has a good case? Now, if you're like me, you probably think it's bizarre as hell that all this stuff was being discussed so openly within the company. Not only does it show they have no fear of reprisal for being bigoted against problematic groups of people, but why the hell are people discussing politics and society and all that other crap at Google in the first place? Don't these people have to spend time on, their jobs, working? Well, that's where the real weirdness of the Google case comes into play. You see how they talk about themselves as Googlers, and do you have googly values? Why they believe they have to change the culture. Because they don't believe that working at Google is just a job. At its best, it's a lifestyle, a culture, and at its worst, it's a cult. It reminds me of the Venture Brothers joke on Disney.
Brisbyland was but a prelude. The next step is Brisby life! And this Brisby dome is the motto. A perfect society in the Brisby mold. Safe, clean, self-sufficient.
And to me, that's what makes this doubly disturbing. Now who knows, maybe it's not so bad. These all come from the filing against Google. They're purposely cherry-picking the worst things they could find that support their case. For all the thousands of employees, maybe these people are just in the minority. I hope so, I really do. Because Google is one of the largest and most influential companies in the world. And it leads to a very dangerous road if they're putting an ideological-driven finger on the scale. And when you see how open these people are about pushing out certain ideologies, it reminds me of the various liberal arts sections of colleges seeking to drum out all ideological opposition. And if that happens with Google, then that finger is going to press harder and harder on that scale. So I can only hope that not only will Damore and the others win their case against Google, but that the judgment will be very broad, and it will show not only the higher-ups at Google, but all companies that they cannot act this way. Just work on your programs and your coding and your products. Leave out all of this social group crap. People can argue with each other politically on their own time. Much like its individual employees, Google needs to leave politics at the door. And as just a note, I've decided not to finish part 2 of the 1791L video, as I feel I made my point well, and part 2 is just more of the same. It started to feel like I dug up a dead horse just to punch it in the face a few more times. Next video will instead be a more fun and wacky one. Unless some big news story breaks that distracts me. So hopefully North Korea won't nuke anyone.